So, we've been exploring the grand finale of the good life, happiness, friendship, and that ultimate bliss, nirvana. But how did societies, especially in the Middle Ages, grapple with the nuts and bolts of organizing themselves? That brings us to political philosophy. Now, some folks might raise an eyebrow and say, hold on, politics in the Middle Ages? Isn't that just theology wearing a crown? They argue that the worldly realm, the regnum, was always playing second fiddle to the spiritual realm, the sacerdotium. Theology was king, the church was queen. Or at least, that's what the theory said. But I'm here to tell you, that's not the whole story. Medieval thinkers weren't just passively waiting for divine instructions on how to run a village or a kingdom. They were deeply engaged, wrestling with the practicalities of people living together in public space. They inherited this rich Greek and Roman conversation about the city, the polis, and they ran with it, even as they filtered it through their Christian lens. And here's the kicker. For them, figuring out what politics is wasn't separate from asking why it matters. Defining the political sphere meant defining its purpose, its value. Let's rewind a bit to the ancient Greeks and Romans, the OGs of political thought. Thinkers like Aristotle kicked things off by saying, hey, look around, every community, every city, exists for a reason, it aims for some good. For Aristotle, the city wasn't just a place, it was the highest form of community, aiming for the ultimate good. He saw it as distinct from your family or your village. Why? Because the city is where we truly flourish, where we live out our humanity through reason, both moral and theoretical. It's the environment that completes us. Fast forward to Rome and Cicero echoes this. His civitas wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It represented civilization itself, humanity elevated above barbarism, virtue triumphing over base instincts. Both Aristotle and Cicero painted this picture of the city as the stage for human excellence, a place where reason reigns supreme over mere appetite. This wasn't just abstract philosophy. It was tied to their actual political structures, where the city was the heart of government and culture. Now, Aristotle and Cicero weren't naive optimists. They knew cities don't magically appear harmonious. People have different desires, different interests. So what holds a city together? Justice. Not just fairness in the modern sense, but the fundamental virtue that says, give others what's rightfully theirs. It's the glue that allows us to move beyond looking out only for number one and actually build something shared, the res publica, the commonwealth. Justice, then, becomes the foundation. The ruler's job, the law's purpose, is to respect and promote this common good. And if justice is the foundation, injustice is the rot. Injustice means taking what isn't yours, subordinating others, leading straight into domination, slavery, tyranny. From Plato onwards, this corruption, the city turning nasty, was a huge headache for ancient philosophers. How do you keep the beast of power in check? Then comes Augustine and bam! He throws a massive wrench into the works. His game-changing idea. Because of original sin, human nature itself is fundamentally flawed. Therefore, any human city, no matter how well-intentioned, is doomed to corruption and domination. Ouch. But Augustine wasn't completely throwing the baby out with the bathwater. He still believed in the classical dream of a true city, a place of fulfillment through freedom and justice. The question was, what is that city now? His answer was radical. The only real city is the city of God. Our true citizenship, our ultimate belonging, comes not through civic virtue or clever laws, but through God's grace alone. He took the classical tools, good nature, reason, justice, but repurposed them. God created humans good, gave us reason to know Him, and established justice. But Augustine redefined justice as rightful dominance, the superior ruling the inferior. Since God is the ultimate superior, true justice starts with acknowledging Him as master. The fall wasn't just about disobeying rules. It was about presuming autonomy, rejecting God, falling into wrongful dominance. So, if earthly cities are inherently corrupt due to our fallen nature, what's the point of politics? Augustine's answer is fascinating. Forget building a perfectly just earthly city. That's a pipe dream. Instead, the goal of human politics is peace. How? By using force, laws, officials, armies to contain our natural tendency towards domination, what he called libido dominandi. This earthly peace isn't the same as God's peace, which is perfect harmony with God. Earthly peace is more like damage control. It prevents total chaos and somehow reflects God's order indirectly. It's useful, even necessary for the righteous, but it's not the final prize. For Augustine, the real action, the place where our soul's good is truly at stake, is outside the human city, in membership of the city of God. Politics is important, yes, but it's ultimately secondary to our spiritual pilgrimage. Augustine's vision dominated the early medieval landscape, but his successors, particularly in the universities, started poking holes and building new frameworks. While courtly advice on ruling and legal theory were buzzing around, the formal scholastic approach took center stage. Interestingly, though Aristotle's works were rediscovered mid-13th century and became hugely influential, ideas connecting nature, the good, and the political weren't entirely new. Cicero's influence lingered. Thinkers like John of Salisbury used it to argue for a positive view of civic life within Christian terms. The argument that the city is natural could even be tweaked to fit Augustine's historical framework. Think of virtue guiding humanity out of a fallen state. Plus, the rediscovery of Roman law brought concepts of natural law, a moral baseline preceding coercive law, and canon law developed similar ideas of natural right. Even the body politic analogy was still floating around. So, Aristotle was a major catalyst, but he wasn't the only player on the field. Enter Thomas Aquinas, the heavyweight champion of medieval synthesis. In his earlier work on kingship, he picks up Aristotle's baton. Yes, humans are rational animals, aiming for a good life through reason, and we achieve this together, not alone. Communication is key, but Aquinas adds a crucial step. This communication, this living together, is what constitutes the political community. And because individuals pursue their own goods, society needs a director pointing everyone towards the common good. That directing force, those directives, that's the political sphere. So man is by nature a social and political animal. Notice the order: social first, political as a consequence. Now, for Aquinas, politics is super important for achieving the human good, but it's not the whole story. Remember Augustine? The ultimate good is God, Aquinas agrees. We can achieve a natural moral good through politics, but the final ultimate good requires grace. Therefore, politics, being part of the natural order, must serve the higher end. Christian kings? They gotta listen to the Pope, just like they'd listen to Christ himself. Politics isn't autonomous. It's ordered towards something greater. Aquinas really fleshed this out in his Summa Theologiae, especially his treatment of law. He defines law beautifully. It's a rational command for the common good, issued by someone who cares for the community. Think of it as reason directing action for the collective benefit. He then lays out a hierarchy. At the top, eternal law, that's God's reason governing everything. Humans participate in this through natural law, which inclines us towards our proper ends, including knowing God and living socially. Then comes human law, the stuff made by kings and parliaments for the common good of their community. Crucially, Aquinas insists this human law has to align with natural law to be legitimate law. It's not just about social order, it's about aligning with a deeper rational structure. Above even this, there's redemptive law, Christ's teachings pointing towards the final good. So the political laws should aim for good aligned with divine justice. If they do, being a good citizen helps you become a good person. And importantly, for Aquinas, sovereignty, whether God's, the individuals, or the rulers, doesn't contradict law. Law is simply the expression of rational direction. Now let's shift gears to John Duns Scotus, a Franciscan. His order emphasized poverty, renouncing ownership and command. This shaped his view of the world as inherently problematic, a realm of domination needing correction. In his commentary on Lombard's sentences, he gives a historical account of property. Back in Innocence, everything was common, no private stuff. After the fall, human nastiness broke that system. Natural law said, okay, take whatever you want. But just saying okay wasn't enough to make private property legitimate. You needed a new kind of law, a human law. But who makes this law? Authority. Scotus distinguishes between paternal authority, parents naturally rule kids, and political authority, over strangers. Political authority, he argues, doesn't just spring up. It needs to be granted by the people through consent and election. So for Scotus, politics is fundamentally about creating a new order of rights and peace, secured by the people giving authority to rulers. Reason matters, laws need to be rational, but the source of power lies in history and human agreement, not just nature or divine right. Around the same time, John of Paris, a Dominican, tackled the hot-button issue of the relationship between kings and popes. He started with the Thomist idea of the natural political community aiming for virtue. But his main gig was dissecting the powers of the temporal, political, and spiritual church realms. He argued forcefully, just because there's one universal church led by the Pope, doesn't mean God demands everyone submit politically to one single king. Why? Souls are universal, bodies are diverse, faith is universal, but what's good for politics varies by place. So temporal power comes from the people ceding authority to rulers to handle disputes and maintain peace, a SCOTUS touch here. But papal power, that comes directly from Christ, not the people. However, John wasn't a blank check for the Pope. He allowed that if the Pope abuses his authority, he could be removed. There's a natural limit. A key tool here was Roman law's concept of corporations, groups acting as a single body, able to appoint representatives. This idea of the community as an agent was revolutionary and opened doors to thinking about contracts between rulers and the ruled. Just as thinkers were arguing for limits on papal power, Giles of Rome came along with a counter-argument, heavily influenced by Augustine and Dionysius. Around 1302, he wrote on ecclesiastical power, basically saying all legitimate human authority flows upwards to the Pope. His twin pillars were hierarchy and grace. First, hierarchy. Following Dionysius, Giles saw the universe as a chain of being from God down. Applied to humans, this means all legitimate power structures must ultimately derive from the single source of justice, which is the Pope, God's representative on earth. Just as there's one fount of power in God, Giles argued there must be one fount of power in human affairs, the Pope. Second, grace. Giles rejected Aquinas' idea that nature itself provides a basis for legitimate dominion after the fall. For Giles, outside of grace, dominion is just brute force, unjust tyranny. Legitimacy, therefore, depends entirely on submission to the Pope, who embodies grace and thus the only rightful source of authority. It's a top-down, divinely sanctioned hierarchy. This Giles of Rome argument, emphasizing grace over nature for legitimacy, got revived later in the 14th century by John Wycliffe in England. Wycliffe, likely influenced by FitzRalph, used this Augustinian slant to critique the English Church, challenging its vast landholdings and jurisdictional claims, and arguing that kings could tax clergy. His logic was stark. If grace is primary, and the Pope's authority is the only legitimate source of grace, then anything else is illegitimate. This was a direct challenge. Jean Gerson, a prominent theologian, pushed back hard, developing arguments for a kind of natural right inherent in natural beings, trying to push back against Wycliffe's seemingly extreme position. The debate was fierce. Ultimately, Wycliffe's ideas were condemned as heretical at the Council of Constance. Interestingly, centuries later, during the Renaissance of Thomism, thinkers like Francisco de Vitoria would actually use the very decrees condemning Wycliffe to argue against the Spanish crown's dispossession of American Indians, citing the idea that non-Christians couldn't be dispossessed simply because they were sinners. Talk about unintended consequences. Now for a real game-changer, Marsilius of Padua. Living in Padua, a city-state caught in the crossfire between local lords, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the Pope, Marsilius was steeped in republican ideals. His masterpiece, The Defender of the Peace, was a radical defense of civic autonomy. He couldn't buy the Thomist idea that politics sits between natural and divine law. He needed a way to argue for the city's naturalness without bringing in external standards. So he turned to a biological notion of nature. What humans naturally do when unimpeded is good. He argued we naturally seek community and communication to achieve sufficiency and the good life, which peaks in the cultivated life of the city. Thus, the political community is natural. But here's the twist. Marsilius fused this with Augustine. He said, if humans hadn't fallen, we wouldn't need cities. The good life would already be available. Sin messed things up, forcing us to create these structures. So the natural human good today is living peacefully and sufficiently together in the city. Since Marsilius rejected Thomist natural law, how does law come about? Simple. Humans need it for peace, so they create it. The legislator is the people, or the majority acting for the common good. No one else can legislate for them. To enforce the law, they appoint a ruling part. Think of it as the city's executive branch, like the heart of an animal. But this ruler isn't above the law. They must follow the community's laws. This defines the political, the essential structure for a functioning community. When does it go wrong? When two ruling parts clash, like the emperor and the pope in his day. His solution? Shocking. He argued there is no rightful coercive spiritual jurisdiction over humans on earth. Papal claims to interfere in worldly matters, tyranny. Christ himself refused worldly power, setting an example. True spiritual authority is teaching, which falls under civil jurisdiction. Marsilius even envisioned a Christian politics where the faithful emperor calls church councils and enforces their decisions, ensuring both political and spiritual order depend on his unimpeded authority over all Christians. Radical stuff. William of Ockham, another Franciscan excommunicated in Munich, took a different tack. Like Marsilius, he opposed the Pope's claims to worldly power, but unlike Marsilius, he didn't deny the Pope any spiritual authority. Occam's mission was to draw a clear line between spiritual and temporal jurisdiction. How did he ground temporal authority? Not with natural law or biological regularity, but with natural rights. He defined rights as juridical abilities, like the right to use things, meaning you can use them unless someone has a good reason to stop you. This right of using is natural, given to everyone by nature or God, and applies to believers and unbelievers alike. It's subjective, it justifies your actions based on your own standing. Unlike Marsilius's nature, this isn't about what we do, but about rights we possess. Occam argued we have natural rights to self-sufficiency, and crucially, rights to acquire property and establish rulerships. These rights explain why we have cities and empires, which existed before Christianity. Politics is secular, born from these natural rights, but it's also marked by the fallen human urge to dominate. Occam was skeptical if any secular city could escape tyranny. But for the Church, spiritual authority must avoid domination to be truly spiritual. Authoritarianism in the Church is tyranny. Paradoxically, the spiritual community properly functioning becomes the only one truly fulfilling the ancient ideals of freedom and justice. So, wrapping up our whirlwind tour through medieval political thought, we saw how much of the discussion revolved around the specific tensions of the time, the Pope versus the Emperor, the role of the Church in worldly affairs. But beneath that there was a deeper quest, figuring out how to govern rightly, how to create societies that work both practically and spiritually. Along the way, these thinkers hammered out concepts that still resonate today. Natural rights, the idea that humans can govern themselves, the possibility of self-government, the power of collective action, and the eternal struggle between freedom and tyranny. Above all, they kept asking the most fundamental questions. What is politics really? And what good is it supposed to do? These aren't just dusty old debates, they're the roots of many of our ongoing conversations about society, governance, and the good life.